Lonely Monk Productions. I don't know if y'all have seen Spider-Man Far From Home yet, but yo!
That's my Jawn! Hey yo, displace the guilt and...
What's good, friends and family, neighbors near and far? Welcome to an all-new episode of the Yo, That's My Jawn podcast. The podcast, website, brand, movement, way of life dedicated to the embrace and championing of your passions. I am your host, Nate Runkle, a.k.a. John McClane, a.k.a. Duke Johnson, a.k.a. Sean John Diddy Combs, a.k.a. that guy who always brings a collection of Blu-rays bought at the last minute at the 7-Eleven around the corner for the White Elephant Exchange at the company Christmas party, a.k.a. Nate 3.0, back at it again here with another episode of the podcast. As always, I hope this podcast finds you all in good health and in good spirits. Well, what's up, folks? Okay, so you know how your favorite podcasts and TV shows always take a holiday break, and they either do things like a mailbag episode or a clip show, or they just air a repeat. Well, I realized why that is. This time of year is busy as fuck. So yes, this podcast comes to you a little delayed, but you got it. So cut me some slack. I am but one man swimming in a sea of lights and elves and fat men in chimneys and lines at the store. And to be honest, a COVID variant that has come swinging through Whoville trying to snatch up all of our toys. And, well, you get it. Anyway, you could be anywhere in the world, and yet you're here with me. And I appreciate that. In a wee bit, I'll be joined by Dan Drago of the 25 O'Clock podcast. We had a phenomenal conversation, so phenomenal that it clocked in as my longest interview to date. So we're going to break this up into two parts. Part one, which you are listening to right now, well, that drops today. Part 2 will drop next week on Monday the 27th. And I can hear you already. Well, I don't trust your promises, Nate. And that's fair, but you can trust this one. As a matter of fact, the episode is already edited and scheduled, so there is no chance that I don't hit that target. I mean, well, unless, of course, the world ends, which, look, would any of us be surprised at that by this point? We're also going to drop a little Christmas Eve pod full of holiday cheers. Consider it the Jawn Before Christmas. It's going to be made up of some tracks from last year's In the Basement sing-along and maybe some new treats. Maybe. We'll see. But speaking of new treats in this proper podcast space, I just want to give you a little taste of what kind of tidings of joy we have in store for you, especially if you missed last year's live stream. You see, it's me, and it's a ukulele, and it sounds a little something like this. Gifts I'm preparing for some Christmas sharing, but I pause because hanging my stocking, I can hear a knocking. Is that you, Santa Claus? Sure is dark out, ain't the slightest spark out on my clanking jaws. Who's there? Who is it? Stopping for a visit? Is that you, Santa Claus? Are you bringing a present for me? Something pleasantly pleasant for me. And it's just what I've been waiting for, but would you mind slipping it under the door? Cold winds are howling, or could that be growling? My legs feel like straws. My, homie, my. Kindly would you reply? Is that you, Santa Claus? Hanging the stocking, I can hear a knocking. Is that you, Santa Claus? Who is it stopping for a visit? Is that you, Santa Claus?
so scared. Stop teasing, 'cause I know that you're there. We don't believe in no goblins today, but I can't explain why I'm shaking this way. Oh, now I can see old Santa through the keyhole. I'll get to the cause. One peek and I'll try them. Is that an eye there? Is that you, Santa Claus? Please, please, I'm begging my please. Oh, is that you, Santa Claus?
My guest today is a former touring musician who in 2014 decided to sit down at his kitchen table, set up some microphones, and start talking to his friends and acquaintances in the Philly music scene. Those conversations were the start of the 25 O'Clock podcast, Philadelphia's longest running music podcast, ... He thinks. I think so too. This year, he has celebrated his 200th episode, and he shows zero signs of slowing down. His podcast is without a doubt one of the most important showcases of the Philadelphia music scene, and I am beyond honored to have him on the show here with me today. Folks, it is my pleasure to welcome to the show, Dan Drago.
All right, now it's all yours. I'll get out of the driver's seat.
No, I love it. I love it. Ladies and gentlemen, I am joined today by the great Dan Drago. Dan, thank you for joining me on Yo, That's My Jawn.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Nate.
So I like to tell everybody kind of how I find out about people. So in the early days of kind of creating, or not even before creating the podcast, right? What I wanted to do was literally what you're doing, but you're already doing that space. So I found you and I was like, oh shit, someone's doing it. But it wasn't like a feeling of like, damn, I guess I can't do it. It was more like a relief. Like finding you was like a relief because there's so much great talent in this area that I was glad that someone was talking to people from this area. So before anything, I just want to thank you for showcasing the brilliant musicians that, you know, that I'm sure we've all palled around with for the past however long.
You're welcome. I'm glad I could offer some sort of validation when you were coming up with an idea, because sometimes it is good. It isn't a deterrent to see someone else also have your idea. You're just like, oh, good, my idea is not insane because
right.
someone else is doing it. But when I started the show, there was nobody doing it. So I'm like, well, this is just going to be my weird thing, man. Like, this is just going to be the thing I do.
Yeah. And, you know, one of the things I love that that you like to tag on is the longest running Philadelphia podcast music podcast, maybe, or what I think. Yeah, exactly. But it's got to be.
I am 99.9% sure that it is. And then we threw that tagline around. We took the I think app, and then we threw that around in press when I was like getting ready to do my 200th episode. And I thought like, well, here's do or die. Like, here's where we're going to find out.
Yeah.
Like someone would crawl up and be like, I've been doing it for like 2 weeks longer than I have. And then I would have to bow to them. I'd be like, no, you are correct. You have been doing it longer than me. But nobody wants to admit it, or it's not a thing.
That's right. That's right. I love it. So tell everyone listening a little bit about yourself. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Western New York. I'm from Rochester, New York. I was born in Philadelphia. Simply because this is where my parents lived when I was born. We don't have family here. No real ties here to the area at all. This is just where my father got, his first job when my mom got married, and he got a job like you do. And, a few years later, there I come. We kind of lived around the area, like Norristown, King of Prussia, things like that. But when I came back here in would have been like 03 or 04, it was just kind of weird and funny. It's just like, oh, I guess I'm going back, but like it didn't feel, I wasn't going home. Like
right.
Home is Western New York. Like home is Rochester. So, but I always have to throw that in there. I'm like, technically I am from here.
You've got an anchor call to Philly. I like it. Oh, go ahead.
Born on City Line Avenue, like that.
Oh, so you can't get much more Philly.
Yeah. Oh, it was funny when I was getting interviewed for Mainline Today, the Mainline glossy magazine, which was fun. I'd never appeared like in a legit magazine, something you could buy in a newsstand. It was wild. That was sort of the thing that I pitched to them, where I was just like, I was born technically on the Mainline side of City Line Avenue. The hospital I was born in, I think that building is now part of St. Joseph's campus. I think it's a dorm or something.
Okay. So when you're growing up, how long were you in before you guys moved back?
We moved back to Rochester. I think it was like 2 or 3 years old.
Okay.
That we moved into the house that my grandfather built, that my father grew up in. That was the house that he got. And we lived in there, and then we grew up I lived in Fairport, New York, which is just like another suburb outside of Rochester. Anyone listening who knows about the locale will have thoughts and feelings about the different towns, and everyone else will just be like, okay.
Nice.
But yeah, I went to high school there, graduated high school, went to college in Western New York, out by Lake Erie, and then moved here like 03, 04.
Okay. So when you were growing up and you were a little kid, like what kind of music was playing around the house? Like what were your parents listening to?
My dad likes a lot of, I did dad rock, essentially, like, sort of that genre right there. Dad likes Neil Young, Tom Petty, The Who, Zeppelin, Jethro Tull, Sabbath, like the little Zappa and Pink Floyd and things like that. He's a big Leslie West fan. That's the guitar player for the band Mountain, which later on in life, I played a show that Leslie West was also on the bill, and no one in my band thought it was a big deal except me.
Except you.
I thought it was the coolest thing ever. And I have this picture of me with him. And then he died a couple years ago. And I was just like, oh man, I'm so glad I met him, because he was such a nice person, a really, really nice guy. I called my dad from the show. I was just like, Leslie West is here. You're literally the only other person I know who gives a shit who Leslie West is. But all right. Yeah. And then my mom was like, my mom liked James Taylor. She liked, they liked Joni Mitchell and, things like that. Moody Blues. I grew up at that time in my life in the 80s, my parents were big into just sort of what I like to call the like post 70s evangelical Christian movement.
Okay.
So there's this like, I call it like hippies for Jesus, essentially, is what it is. So like my parents went to school in the early 70s, went to college in the early 70s, kind of in that crashing wave of the 60s. And one of the things that really cropped up on campuses that kind of came with that was this sort of like hip, young, Bible fellowship type thing.
Yeah.
So not only, were my parents into all this stuff I just said, they were into like also this sort of, evangelical Christian equivalent of it as well, because there was tons and tons of Christian folk rock and, Christian style blues rock and stuff like that. It was like every major genre and trend that existed in the 70s and early 80s, there was an analog of that.
Okay.
In Christian music. And that would go on well into the 90s as well, but that's a whole other story.
What kind of artists? Because I'm trying to I'm vaguely familiar.
Some of the Christian artists. Oh gosh, I'm trying to think some of the 70s ones. I cannot think of any. Like I can picture these these record covers in my head, because they all came out of my out of my parents' record collection. And for the life of me, I cannot think of one of them right now, of what any of them were called.
Yeah.
I was like, if I had my mom on speed dial right now, like she would start telling me immediately. But like, oh gosh, I'm give me a second here. Now I got nothing.
Yeah.
But I remember the record covers, and like when you're a kid, like music is music, like
right.
Kind of some kind of disco oriented, funk oriented, and folky and stuff like that. And when you're 4 years old, like you just want to spin around on the carpet to literally whatever is happening. So I certainly didn't know the difference between a Cat Stevens record and whatever else that my parents were playing.
Yeah, it's funny that you say you remember the album covers because, like, to me as a kid, that was like, somewhat similar. Like, it wasn't that I was listening to any kind of specific music. I was listening to that album cover's cool, Dad. Put that one on, like that kind of thing.
It's all visual. You can open them up to, like, the gatefold vinyl and all that. Like, it's very, very cool. It's something that I have sort of enjoyed with the resurgence of vinyl over the last decade or so, is that, like, we've gotten back into big art again.
It's awesome. I my dad had a big vinyl collection, and he passed away, so it's mine now. But like, just looking at it and like just holding physical media on that size, on that scale, gives it a weight that just isn't there for anything else. And there's albums that I've had CDs, and I've had them, streaming and whatnot, that, like, I'm like, oh, let me pick this up on vinyl. And it's like finding a new album almost, because it holds so much more weight.
And vinyl, like, and this is weird. And, like, some people go with me on this, and some people think I'm crazy, but I have, like, not just like sonic sense memories of listening. Like, vinyl smelled a certain way when you were a kid, like record jackets smelled a certain way, and that, like, that very, very thin plastic that would be on the outside of the records when they weren't covering records in paper, when they were covering in this, like, very thin, like, that has a whole sensory thing right there. And anytime I find a record that's, like, coated in that very, very, it's almost like a plastic bag for your record. Like, boom, like, I go back to being like 4 years old, and, like, my father showing me, it's like, well, this is how you hold a record. You don't, like, again, don't put your fingerprints on it, just, and so for years I thought if you put your fingerprint on a record, you ruined it. And it turned out he just didn't want me to grab it from that thing. So he said, don't put your fingerprints on it. So, but for years I thought that you couldn't put your fingerprints on a record. No, don't do it.
That's awesome. Were your parents musical? Did they play any instruments?
No, which is funny because myself and my two brothers, we all play. And my brother is well into the professional music world. I have gone back and forth. My youngest brother played in high school and never really played again. But we all play, but my parents didn't play. My mother's brother, my uncle John, was a folk guitar player. Again, coming from that era of the early 70s. And he had bands and stuff like that. And he would always, when we were kids, he would pull out the acoustic guitar and play us, kid songs, play us I've Been Working on the Railroad. He had, like, this made up song. It was called the Coconut Song, that he just basically just sung the word coconut over and over again. But again, you're 4. Like, what do you care?
Yeah. He knows his audience. Yeah.
Oh yeah. He had a voice to it. It was kind of like it had a little rhythm to it. Like, that's
awesome.
He was like, that's probably the first guitar I ever put in my hands. I was probably like 5 or something like that, where I was allowed to, like, touch the guitar. He had a beautiful, beautiful Martin guitar. I believe he still has it.
Nice.
They got it at the Martin factory. So my parents, again, being, like, living in this area, met, people through, churches and Bible study and all that. And one of them was sales rep at Martin Guitars in the late 70s. And that's how they got the guitar for my uncle. And then later on in life, when I was a teenager, I went and toured the Martin factory in Bethlehem. I think that was, like, probably right at the point in my life where I was, like, getting it in my head that I could also play a guitar.
Yeah. What age is that? Like,
it's like 12,
okay.
13. I think I get my first acoustic guitar. I'm 13, maybe 14. I don't remember exactly, but it was just, off to the race. As I always joke, I go, and from that point on, my life was ruined. Like, I was never going to want normal things that normal people wanted after that. I was going to
100%.
I was going to then make my life be all about, how do you do this more? How do you find other people to do this with? How do we get paid? Maybe, I don't know. Let's figure that one out.
Yeah. I still haven't figured that part out. What, did you take lessons or self-taught?
I took lessons for the first, not even a year. There was kind of all comes back to church, which is odd. I don't want to give people the wrong impression. I am not necessarily a churchy religious person myself now, and that's just simply to say so that I don't give the wrong impression of myself. It's not a value judgment. I don't want to give the wrong impression.
Sure.
But we were going to Methodist church growing up, and in like the second floor of the Methodist church, a couple of old folkies like set up a guitar, like a little music school up there. They just, rented space from the church. And so I started taking lessons up there. There's this old folk guy. His name was Ralph. He taught me, where to put my hands and how to pick and how to play, old folk songs. He taught me, was the first song he ever taught me was the Dream On by Aerosmith.
Oh, nice.
Not an easy song to give.
Yeah, that's feet into the fire.
And at the time, that would have been like probably 93 or 94. To me, there was nothing less cool than like playing an Aerosmith song. I wanted to play Nirvana. I wanted to play Soundgarden. I wanted to play Smashing Pumpkins. Like that was what I wanted. I could care nothing for, this dinosaur band. But I can still play that riff. Like I can still play, like that opening, that whole part that Joe Perry plays right there. Again, pretty complex, but he was teaching me in that. He was teaching me hammer-ons. He was teaching me, certain like riffs that had, more than one string in them and stuff like that. So I got to give it to Ralph, wherever he is. I would imagine he's probably passed on at this point, because that was a long time ago. But I got to give it to him. He taught me a couple of things. And then as soon as I had like even remotely just the most rudimentary tools, I was out of there. Like, yeah, I was like, all right, thanks. I'm going to go be in a garage with my friends and suck.
Yeah. So, off to the races. What, are you just trying to learn other people's stuff at that point? Or are you immediately writing songs? Like when I learned how to play, I immediately was like, oh, these are chords. Now I can just get all of this out of my head and do something with it. Were you that way or?
Not immediately. I was in a band with my best friend, James Hearn, who's still my best friend to this day. He lives in Austin now, but he used to live up on the East Coast. And we were just like teenagers, just like in the garage, in the basement, making tapes, like just on a cassette recorder of just the two of us, like figuring out how to play Nirvana tunes, figuring out how to play, like Radiohead tunes off the bends and stuff like that. But James wrote a lot of songs, and I think at the time I was just like, well, if one of us writes songs, you just write the songs, like, and I'll help you write the songs, but you write the songs. It wasn't until later that I got more into writing my own songs. I was also just super into learning how to play other people's songs. So I was I'm trying to think what was big on the Goo Goo Dolls were like had just broken at that point, and they're from Buffalo, so not too far down the road from where I was from. And I remember learning how to play Name and learning what an alternate tuning was, because I didn't know what an alternate tuning was at that point. Learning how to play that. I was a huge Jim Blossoms fan, just the biggest. And then there was this band out of Boston. Didn't get quite the acclaim as everyone else, but there was a band called Buffalo Tom. That was
yes.
Who are just like Bill Janovitz is like an unsung treasure. That whole band is just an unsung treasure of the 90s. They're one of the best 90s, guitar, like power pop bands. Them, Counting Crows, we're big Counting Crows fans. Wallflowers, when they came out, I thought they were outstanding. Much to my dad's chagrin, I liked Jacob more than Bob at that time. I still think I might. I don't know about that. I don't know if that's cool, if I can say that out loud, but I think I just might be more of a Jacob guy than a Bob guy. And I love Bob, but like,
if you're going to say it, this is the place to say it, because I don't know if you know, but the motto of this podcast is displace the guilt, embrace the pleasure. So like it is literally the place to make unpopular. I originally was going to, we'll get to it way later. But one of the things in the top 10 countdown that I was going to originally have in there was give me an unpopular music opinion. But a friend of mine was like, that's a really challenging question to throw at just anybody. And I was like, I don't want to talk to just anybody. I want to talk to people who have an answer to it.
I have tons. I have tons of unpopular music opinions.
Give me one. Give me one besides Bob Dylan and Jacob Dylan.
I mean, and that's just a preference thing. Like, that's not me. Like, I think I love Bob Dylan. Like, you know, I don't think that you can, you know, be of my age with this beard glasses combo thing I have going here, without being a Bob guy. And I definitely went through my Bob phases, you know, really dove in lyrically and stuff like that to, like, you know, see what he was about. But like an unpopular, I mean, let me think. Oh yeah. So this has come up recently because of Get Back, the Beatles documentary on the app. They don't need
more press. Yeah.
They don't need it. But I said, it was at Thanksgiving. It was me, my brother, and my father, and we were both a little into our cups at that point. And I just kind of blurted it, because we were all three of us Paul guys. Like, we're just all like dyed in the wood Paul guys. And one thing you kind of learn in that first episode is just like how great George, I mean, you always know how great George is. But that whole thing where he's bringing them all these songs and they're just shouting them down, and those songs will go on to be on All Things Must Pass, like possibly the greatest post-Beatle record on its own. I'm not talking about career. I'm just talking about like on its own, like that or Ram. Like, I don't know. But anyway, I blurted out, I was like, I'm like John Lennon is the least talented member of the Beatles, hands down.
Wow.
I was like absolutely. And like, I really, when I said that, it was like a record scratch. My brother, my father, like, what? And I'm like, okay. I was like, I'm not going to get into it. I'm not a John guy. He's fine.
Yeah.
He had the charisma. He had the character. Clearly had the most personality of everyone in the band. But if you want to take it pound for pound, songwriting and playing ability, he's the worst of them. His guitar playing in that documentary sounds so bad. It sounds terrible. And like, someone said to me once, it's like, well, you know, he's got Epiphone Casino and George has got a Rosewood Telly. I go, you switch those guitars, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
Like,
yeah.
George is still miles ahead. And like, even Paul's a really good guitar player. John, again, charisma and personality, and you know, in a rock band, that's as important as being able to play the guitar. So
yeah,
you know, good on you, John, for that. But you know, I'm not a John guy.
I was always a George guy. So like, and I know that sounds like so weird, but like one of my favorite moments in anything ever, and I call it the greatest passive aggressive moment in the history of mankind, is in that first episode. And it is, I remember it when I first saw Let It Be. And it is when he just says, I'll play whatever you want me to play, Paul.
Or I won't play at all. Yes. Oh God. Yeah. It's just, but anyone who's ever been in a band, like that moment is so real. I saw that. Okay. So we're going to go off on a little tangent right here.
Good.
You've seen that footage before this Peter Jackson thing. So have I. No one believes me that like there was a Let It Be documentary film that kicked around. I think it was on the BBC or something. I think they probably showed it at Christmas. I had a VHS bootleg of it in college. Someone got it. And we took it to the Media Lab and we spun off a handful of VHS copies of it so we could have it. And I watched the shit out of that.
Yeah.
I watched it so much. So that, like that scene right there. And as I was watching the first episode Get Back, I was just like, I've seen this before. I've seen a lot of this before. Now the footage was much better and it was edited better. And it was just, they were telling a different story this time around. But I'm like, watch. I was like, I've seen this. I know what he's going to say. Okay, good. I'm not crazy.
That's the best part is like, I literally, as like, I've talked about it countlessly forever. And then when that part happened, I was like, oh my God, I remembered it exactly
it's
as
real. Yeah. And again, it's such a great moment. He's like, I'll play what you want. I'll play whatever you want, or I won't play at all. Like, you can just tell at that point, he's just like, I've had it. Yeah. I've had it. I'm done being kind, gentle George, the young boy, the little one of the band. I'm George Harrison. Like,
and you know, I think that Get Back does a better job of framing Paul in that conversation as well. At just saying like, no, I'm not saying that. Like, I'm just, what I'm trying to get at is, you know, like,
I just think it was just it's such a horror. Like, I'm glad we have the footage and everything, but what a horrible idea.
Yeah.
To stick them all in that room, in that soundstage, from what I understand, was freezing. Like, because they're all in coats. Like, they're not wearing coats to be stylish. Like, they're wearing coats because it's cold on that soundstage. And they're just like trudging in every day at like 9 a.m. to go write the next Beatles record. And oh, by the way, there are 5 cameras moving around you right now. Like, talk about something that's so very anti-creative.
To think about the music that came out of those sessions is really fascinating, because I couldn't imagine, like, the fact that they kind of imploded or whatnot, is legendary. But like that couldn't have helped. Like that. It's like, and you've been in bands. Yes. Yep.
Okay. Like, there's a certain age that you get to where you want to do something else. You want to try something else, and it could even just be different kind of music or a different sort of ensemble or something. And they were at that age because they were kids. They were kids when they met. They cut their teeth in the in the cabarets and the clubs. Like, again, playing 3 shows a night, played 6 hours a night, 5-6 nights a week. You've seen the 8 Days a Week documentary that Ron Howard. If that doc doesn't show you that, like, for a period, they were probably the best live band to exist, just based on just hours worked, those Hamburg runs and stuff like that. They play like 30 hours in a week and practice. So of course they're going to be great, but they go and they become the biggest thing in the world, and it becomes insane. And they're so young. They're not even done being, like, figuring out who they are as people yet. And then I think they get to an age around, like, Let It Be, where they're just like, I don't want to do this anymore. Like, they had kids and stuff like that. They're just like, I don't want to be the Beatles anymore. It's really hard.
And not just that, but I mean, you see it with John, you see it with George. Like, they had different, like, they were listening to different stuff. And like, and Paul's right, is like, I've been known to be a Paul hater, which isn't really hate. It's just that, like, I'm hypercritical of him, and I think it's just because he's alive. It's his own fault for outliving everybody else. But
you can't kick Ringo around, man. That's
exactly. So Paul's just my whipping boy. But you see
John's mine, and he's dead. So like that makes it even worse for me. And there's like, he's dead. I go, it's not my fault.
Yeah. Do I look like Mark David Chapman? Don't answer that. So. But no, like, you hear Paul constantly saying, like, we're just a rock and roll band, and like, George was like so far past that at that point. Like, he no longer wanted to rock. Like, that wasn't his bag anymore.
Yeah. No, he wanted to. Yeah, he was highly influenced, not just by Eastern music. Everyone says, like, everyone saddles George with, like, oh, he was the Eastern music guy, because they were all into it. Yeah. And John, I mean, here's where I'll give John credit. John wrote some of the better tunes in the Beatles that integrated that Eastern music. I absolutely think so. But George was like ready not just to go off and like write, Eastern music songs. He just wanted to put it in his brain with all the other stuff in there. And go off and beat George Harrison, which we all see how well that worked out really well for him.
Worked out very well for him. Very well. So when do you put together your, not to jump back in, but when do you start your first band? Like, what was
I'm like 15, 16. Me and my buddy James in the basement, and we're wandering around, and we find this kid who just moved to town like that year. He was a year ahead of us. His name was Tony Schleen, and he was the best candidate as a drummer because he had played percussion in orchestra and had a snare drum.
Okay.
Just a snare drum. But we're like, well, that's more than we have. Like, we don't have that. And I think between the 3 of us, we all pooled our money and got him a cheap kit. Like, because we're just like, okay, we have to go. We have to do this now. Like, we don't have time to wait for Christmas or birthday or whatever. Like, we found someone who had a kit. I think it was like $150 or something like that, which, in 1995, like, between 3 teenagers, we're just like, all right, well, let's scrape together $150. And we did. And we got him a drum kit and a couple of cymbals. And again, boom, we're off there. I was playing guitar. James was playing guitar. And our buddy, Tommy McGarry, was playing bass. And Tommy's dad was like the director of the music department at Nazareth College. Like, their dog's name was Bartok. Like, that's the kind of world that Tommy came from. And Tommy was a really good, upright orchestral and jazz bass player. But he, again, in his sort of, just probably a little bit of rebellion for him at the time. He wanted to play the electric bass in a rock band. And so that's how we ended up. We were these four guys, just James had original songs. I think back about like how we formed as a band. And it is interesting. I know it's not the norm that right off the bat, we had like, I think anywhere between 4 and 6 original songs that we were just like, ready. Like James had written a bunch of songs, sad, angsty teenage songs that we put behind like really happy, like power poppy chord progressions, because that's how you sell it. And we were never like, we were always influenced by things, because as I said, we loved Jim Blossoms, we loved Buffalo Tom, we loved the Counting Crows. But we very much, and I don't think we would have had the words for it at the time, but we very much wanted to be our own thing. We wanted to be influenced, but not be like trying to be these things, because we loved all kinds of stuff too. And we loved Hendrix, and I'm a big Who fan, and we loved Green Day, and like Rancid, and like the punk of the 90s as well. We loved all that stuff, and we loved Nine Inch Nails, and like all kinds of stuff, because it's the 90s and it was all kind of on the radio and all there for you to have. As we got older, again talking about the Beatles, like we were just like the Beatles, and then we all broke apart. But like as we got older, we would find our things. Like I became a lot more into like what was kind of like electronic music in the 90s. So I was a big Portishead fan, although they're not particularly electronic. But then like at the time in like, 96, 97, you get The Prodigy, and you get Crystal Method, and you get, Orbital and stuff like that. And that's like kind of in the groundwater as well. And I always had a penchant a little bit for the heavier stuff. Like I loved, stuff like White Zombie, Monster Magnet, later, they weren't around then, but like later, I would discover Caius, but they were, because through Queens of the Stone Age, and realized like, oh, this would have been right up my alley at the time. And I loved Black Sabbath, and I loved, and Soundgarden too. Soundgarden were a huge band for me, because they were just, their sound was so much bigger. And Chris Cornell could sing the hell out of anything.
I miss that man so much. I'm still, there's a thing later on about shows that you wish you had seen. Like Temple of the Dog did a tour right before Chris Cornell.
I didn't go either. I was just like, I'm not going to this. And I didn't go to the super unknown, like 25-year reunion tour. And if you think I don't kick myself about that, oh man, like, I interviewed a woman. She plays under the name Hemming. She hadn't been active in a couple of years, but who of us has been? But she did. She got to go open for him on his solo tour. Like when he was just out, just him and just Chris and a guitar, like playing theaters, and she got to open for him, which was great because she was such a huge fan. And then she found out as she was on tour, like the other people told her, they're like, he watches your set from the side stage. She's like, he doesn't do that normally. He doesn't have to. There's like, but he comes out every night. He watches you for at least 2 or 3 songs. And then he, goes back in the dressing room, and she didn't know that, for 30 minutes or so that she was up there. But she says she'll always remember that about him, like him just being this. And he said he was incredibly kind to her and just, very supportive. And just the fact that he rolled out every night and watched a couple songs just because he dug it. And I was just like, cool, that dude still loved music. Like, whatever was going on inside him, he was still happy to be playing music. It's funny, I was watching Casino Royale a little bit ago, kind of rewatching all the Daniel Craig Bonds in lieu of the new Daniel Craig Bond, and he sings the theme to Casino Royale, and he starts singing it. I watched it because I was like, God damn, this is probably like one of the best Bond themes. I'm like second to like maybe Tom Jones's Thunderball or something like that, or You Only Live Twice or something, or Goldfinger. I was just like, God, this is like, I can't remember the song, but like that hook to that Bond theme, you're just like, oh yeah, he could do anything.
that theme and the one that Jack White and Alicia Keys did.
Quantum of Solace one, yeah.
there were two moments where, because up until that point, I was like, I don't know that we're gonna have another good Bond theme, so maybe we should stop trying. And then they were like, 1, 2, here you go, and I was like, okay, I'm wrong. So
yeah, because like a lot of the Brosnan Bonds, like I couldn't tell you anything about those themes. I'm sure they were just like what they always do, pop singer or something like that. I could like. But like, let's not discount like the Timothy Dalton ones, because that's where we get Duran Duran's "A View to a Kill," and that's and "Live and Let Die" is Roger Moore, I believe. Right. That's okay. I can't believe that didn't come up in like my big Bond themes. But "A View to a Kill" is a great tune. I love Duran Duran. Like I think Duran Duran is outstanding, and like anytime any big Duran Duran hit comes on the radio, like I will turn it up because it's Duran Duran. Like what? That's so good. They named it twice.
So you were a touring musician for a few years. Like, what band did you play with to do that, or were you bouncing around from?
So I was in the band with my buddies. In high school, into college, it changed and moved around. We all also in the 90s, a lot of us, at least the three core of us, me, James, and Tony, all became huge Fish fans.
Okay.
It was the time, and it got fed to me at the right time, and I just took it. Like, and I still am to this day, like a huge Fish fan. And so we started writing songs under the idea of like, okay, can we have composed sections, just in the way that like Fish would have, and then can we jam? And can we jam in a way that's actually useful, like in the way that they did it or that the Dead did it, as opposed to, the other thing where, someone just extended guitar solos for 20 minutes. We call that jamming. We were very conscious at the time of like, okay, how can we listen to each other and move and change and throw stuff in there and at us? And I think we were all right at it. Like we weren't great at it, but for that age, I think we did okay. But then, life happened. We all went to college and stuff like that and kind of moved, in different places. And, but I moved back to Philly. I moved to Philly in around 03, 04. James was already living here. And when I moved here, it was like, okay, let's have a band as adults. We can just live in a house and practice all the time and write songs together all the time and decide what it is that this band is going to be. And that's what I did. I came to Philadelphia to pretty much do that, because I was living in Fredonia, New York, which is right on Lake Erie, which is where I went to college, working a couple of jobs and just, trying to figure out what I was going to do next. And I knew I didn't want to stay in Western New York. I don't dislike Western New York, but I knew that there was other stuff happening somewhere. I'd been to New York, a handful of times in school. And I think if I hadn't ended up in Philly, I probably would have ended up in New York City. Because everything I thought was cool came from New York City. Because you get that at that age, especially if you grow up East Coasty or not East Coasty. It's just New York City is so much in the zeitgeist. Like it's just New York, New York, New York. Like, and whatever it is that you like, if it's film, if it's art, if it's music, if it's food or whatever, like you will find like New York does it the best. I was big into the Velvet Underground and, CBGB's bands and television and Talking Heads and stuff like that, and the Ramones. And I was just like, oh, well, New York is where it all happens. And then, the Strokes come out in like 2001. Yeah, and stuff like that. You kind of get that resurgence of like New York, like downtown New York, cool again. And then no one can afford to live there ever again. But so I come back to Philly, and we start this band together, and it goes through a few different, versions and names and things like that. But it eventually becomes this band called The Way Home. And that's like, I'd say a good 3 or 4 years of that being kind of what the band was. Not dissimilar to our high school days in terms of like, kind of power pop, guitar led stuff, but a lot of vocal harmonies, 3 or 4 parts. That was always the thing. Anyone who was going to be in the band, they had to sing. Like you had to be able to sing. You didn't have to sing lead, but like you had to be able to blend and pick a part and, come in. That was just so key to us, that like, vocal harmonies. And this is sort of like pre-Fleet Foxes.
Okay.
later, like all that, like would kind of, take that stuff that would be popular. But we were doing it at a time when people are just like, well, they all sing together really well. But it was sort of it was almost like a circus trick to a lot of people, not to us. I mean, we took it very seriously, but like you would get up and you would do 4-part harmony and, break down, and we would do a cappella stuff and things like that. And people would be like, oh, that was neat. And I was just like, oh, this is a parlor trick to them. Like, they just think it's neat. And to us, it was like, no, this is like what we are. This is part of what we are. And yeah, we kind of toured regionally on that. We were never signed to a label, never had a tour manager or anything like that. We just, DIY, figured it out ourselves. Met cool people, played in interesting places, had interesting experiences. And then what happens is you kind of find yourself rolling into your early 30s and you start to wonder, like, okay, well, clearly I don't get to make a living doing this. Like,
right.
But you still want to do it. And, that's kind of where it sort of fell apart a little bit, which is, it's like it is. I'm still friends with everyone. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Who else, like, who were you playing around? Like, what other bands were around? Or where, like, also where were you playing kind of in the city? Because that's right around the time I was kind of starting to do a little original stuff out there.
What was your band, or was it just you?
So I was in a band called the Impact Players, and that was mostly just me. And I mean, we had a full band, but anytime anybody had ever really seen us, it was just me and a buddy of mine playing acoustic, and everyone was always like, you guys are like Tenacious D. And it was like one of those, like, we're fucking not, like,
they're
like,
fine. That's not us.
Yeah,
again, it's not a parlor trick. Yeah,
right. And that's exactly right. But all the, like, main original stuff that I did solo as an artist named, you can see it in my Zoom title there, Nate 3.0 was kind of my nom de plume.
We played, we were Philly based. We played the Khyber back when the stage was downstairs. We played Tin Angel. We played Dobbs. We would play the Pontiac before it got rebranded as the legendary Dobbs to kind of bring back the old name. And the Pontiac, the stage was upstairs. We were upstairs, and it was like, it was real janky, but like kind of great. Like, it's kind of one of those kind of great rooms that if you get 30 or 40 people in there, like, it feels like a good night. Not dissimilar to what it was like playing at Bourbon and Branch. Bourbon and Branch, you get 50 show people in there, and it feels tight. It feels like a good packed night. And, sometimes that's all you need. We played there. Yeah. Dobbs. What was the place on Doc Watson's?
Oh yeah. I love that place.
But yeah, second floor, used to play second floor. MMR used to have a lot of nights at Doc Watson's back then. And then where else? Like, World Cafe Live upstairs, when they first opened, we whoever was booking that upstairs stage, not the big people downstairs stage,
right.
was very receptive to Philly bands. And so if we could pitch them like a 4-band night where we're just like, okay, between these 4 bands, we can probably sell 150 tickets, they were fine with that. They were just like, yeah, sure. Sounds good. And, I always liked working with like World Cafe and North Star. Because again, like, you would just go into these situations and the expectations were right up front. There was no screwing around. There was, you knew where you stood. You knew what you needed to do to have a financially successful night. And it was good. We used to play the Fire, like everyone did at one point or another. Derek Dorsey, as a promoter, gave a lot of bands their first go at putting together a night in a club. And people can say what they will about the Fire, whether they liked it or hated it or whatever, but there were not a lot of places giving us that opportunity. We used to play the Manhattan Room or the M Room that was up on it's basically up catty corner to Johnny Brendis now, except Johnny Brendis didn't have a music room then, not till 2008. That was the place to go. There was a great little there's a promoter named Joe Lekis who used to be in a band called Grammar Debate, who were a really great band. And we met him somehow through other people, and he would book us. He used to book the Khyber as well, back, kind of back towards the end, last few years of the Khyber. But yeah, those were the places that we played in Philly, which is like, when people say that, like, oh, there were less clubs back then than there are now, I'm like, nah, I just listed a whole bunch of rooms. Like, there were a lot of places to play. And we would play some stuff for Penn and Drexel and Temple and things like that. We would figure that out, figure out how to do that. And we would play over in Jersey. There was a couple of rooms in Vineland. There's rooms again now in Vineland from what I hear, but there were a couple of places that we would play in Jersey, or we go up to Steel City in Phoenixville.
Yeah.
Up there, or play either of the Milk Boys, either the one in Bryn Mawr or the one in Ardmore. Because there was no Milk Boy yet here in Philly. There was Lickety Split at 4th and South. We
Love
used to
that
play
place.
play that tiny little stage up there.
Weren't they on Bar Rescue or something like that towards the end?
Don't get me started about the former owner of Lickety Split. He's still a person that if I ever saw him in person, I would probably throw something at him. Those were the places to play, and there was like kind of a crew amongst a certain level. I remember it was us, people like Danny Marie, Katie Barbado. And we would play Connie's too. God, I can't believe we left out Connie's. And we would play with like those kind of bands. There's a band called Venice Sunlight that we used to play with a whole bunch. Those are just the bands off the top of my head. But there were a handful of bands that we would kind of find ourselves on bills with over and over again. And you just become friends. Like you start hanging out when you go to each other's shows and stuff like that. And then, I was joking. It's like a little graduating class or something. Like that's your class.
Absolutely. I really miss. I was talking to Nicole Atkins about this, about how like I don't know if I am just too old or if this scene, just like the live scene and like kind of the live camaraderie just doesn't exist anymore. Like I can't pinpoint it, and I know the pandemic messed things up.
We're too old. That's exactly what it is that we're too old, because I talk to people like Tyler from Tisbury's and August from Riverbee and and Coleman Rigg and like people like that, and like there's a real kind of like Manny Young scene, like Jamie and the Guarded Heart and and all these Best Bear and like all these people know each other, like not just like they know each other, like that's their class right there. So it is, because we are too old. Like okay. That.
Yeah, I thought so. It's fine. It's fine. Speaking of too old, you said you around 30-ish kind of started to phase out. Did you immediately jump into the kind of pod space, or did you take some time to just regroup?
So I was 33. I left the band, which was a huge deal. Like at the time, it was like a divorce a little bit, because, also up to that point, like, so it's 2013. I'm 33 years old, and I've been in bands since I was like 15. Like more than half my life, a large part of my attention is taken up by band stuff, writing songs, going to rehearsals, playing shows, making records, blah, 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 blah. All that occupied a part of my brain and was part of who I was. And suddenly there I am, 33, and I'm just like, well, I'm not in a band anymore. And I had no interest in like, oh, I'll go solo. It's like, no, I don't want to do that either. So I kind of kicked around a little bit. I got involved in like production, because that always kind of been my role in other bands, is figuring out like, well, how do I record us, things like that. And I started like working with other friends and bands doing recording sessions. I had a mobile rig, so I was like, well, let's do this. Did that for a little bit. I started a live concert series, like a DIY concert series, out of the Fleischer Art Memorial, which is in Bella Vista. It's an art school hooked to like an old like decommissioned church space. And that church space, high ceilings, tile floors, just gorgeous sound. And we put on a whole bunch of shows there. It was a lot of fun. Like localish people. I remember there's a band called The Naked Sun, my buddy Drew's band. That's how I met him. Just doing these shows, and like bands like I'm trying to think now off the top of my head, because I have I have a lot of the recordings. I was able to do like multi-track live recordings as well. There's a whole bunch of bands, and it was a lot of fun. And I wasn't particularly interested in trying to compete like a venue, because I was like, well, this is a nonprofit. We haven't budgeted. Like, we have X amount of money to spend in a season on bands. So we just split that up between however X number of bands. Everyone's getting paid. We can just book whoever we want. Like, I don't have to worry about like, oh, if I book these people, will they bring 50 people? I'm just like, hey, you want to play? Yeah. You want $100? Yeah. All right, cool. Come play. Bring some people. Like, we'll put 2 bands on and we'll sell beer, like, you know, kind of thing. And it was great. And, you know, it was my PA and everything. So I was the showrunner for it. It was a lot of fun. I worked with, it's the interview that's out this week, actually, on my show, a guy named Rasan Lucas, who's a promoter for a production company called Afro Taino. And they were booking a lot of, you know, Latin alternative and, you know, Latin style bands. And he and I ran the very first Chicano Batman show in Philadelphia.
Oh, holy crap.
To a crowd of maybe 40 people. If there were 40 people there, that's about as much as I can imagine being there. And these guys, just 4 guys from East LA, they'd never played the East Coast before. They were doing pretty well in LA, like, you know, they in their world playing out there. They'd never been to the East Coast before, never played New York before. And they rolled through Philly and they play our show. Nicest guys you could ever imagine. And then like a couple years later, it just happens. It not just happens for them.
Right.
Like,
they did the work. Right.
They did the work. But like they're in Johnny Walker commercials, and Jack White's taking them on tour, and they're up for like they're getting Grammy noms like later on and stuff like that. Like it's been fantastic to watch their career over all these years, and just think like I was there like at the beginning for them, just another stop on the way for them. But I remember them being really, really nice guys. And they played almost entirely with my back line because they didn't have amps with them or anything. They just flown over with their guitars. And I had to supply a back line for them too. So, I hope they enjoyed it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So how does the podcast start? Do you, did you put pre-planning into it, or were you just like, I'm a podcast now and just jump right in? Well, that was early in the space. Like,
yeah, that was, I started the show in 2014, fall of 2014. All the while that I was doing these shows at Fleischer and helping people make records, it was in the back of my head because I was a pretty avid podcast listener. Like I listened to a lot of podcasts, and I thought like I was a big Marc Maron fan. Like I really dug Marc Maron, not just as a comedian, but just like I liked that these were very long form conversational interviews. It wasn't just questions. And like I'm also a big like Terry Gross Fresh Air fan as well, but she follows a little closer to journalism. She still has conversation. She's got personality, but like I loved Marc Maron because I was just like, yeah, you just get in there and talk with people and like, you know, it all comes out. Of course, that's you and I both know that's not exactly how it works,
right?
But, yeah. But
it seems like it.
Yeah, I thought, what if someone did that, but for Philadelphia musicians, or for even at the time, I wasn't even just limited to Philadelphia musicians at first because I still have friends who toured. So they would like come through Philly and it was like a way to see my friends and be like, well, yeah, come over when you come through Philly to play and we'll talk and they'll go to the show and like, you know, we'll hang out. That'll be sort of my way to keep myself relevant, like with my friends who were still playing and still part of a music community. And then I just slowly just zeroed in on Philly. I was just like, okay, it's just going to be all Philadelphia now. I could not tell you when I made that decision or when I stopped, you know, having people on and work from Philadelphia, but it would still happen from time to time. I remember through the DIY boards on Facebook, a woman reached out to me. Her name was Emily McKelvey, and she was originally from North Carolina, but had been living in South America and like was coming through to play. And she just hit me up on the board. She was just like, hey, I'm coming through. Can I be on your show? And I was just like, I kind of looked at what she was about to go, yeah, I'll do this. Yeah, sure. So that's like the other joy of having your own podcast is that you have your rules and you have your thing, except when you want to change it. And then you just change it.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, tell
me what to do.
Yeah. And it's been really, really great. And it's kind of same thing for me is like, I like talking to people about music and and not just music, like, just any kind of art form or creativity, like things people are passionate about, because you start to find that it's all this, it all kind of comes from the same space,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. The things that drove me to be a songwriter, things that drove me to play in bands is the same thing that drives people to write novels or paint pictures or make films or something like that. Like it's all, at least at some point you look out on the world and you say like, well, this is all fine. The things that I'm into, like I said, you want to be influenced, but you don't want to like go out and kind of regurgitate it. And for me, it was like kind of looking out in the world and just being like, at least when it came to the podcast, I'm like, well, this is the kind of podcast I would listen to. Like I would like to see this in the world. And rather than sit around and wait for somebody to do it, I guess I'll just go do it myself. And that's sort of how it started. Now, if you had asked me over 7 years ago, like, are you still gonna be doing this in 7 years? You can make more than 200 episodes. Like, I don't even think I would have known how to answer that question. Like, it's certainly, I tried not to think of it that way. It was just like, for me, I think my initial number goal, if I ever had a number goal in my head, and I doubt I ever really did, but if I did, I think my first goal was like, well, just do 25, like just get 25 out in a row, like stick to a schedule, don't screw around, don't like do it a couple of weeks and then be off for a month and then do one and then be off for a couple of weeks. I'm like, get a production schedule and stick to it and go. I'm like, just put out 25 and see where that takes you. And once I got kind of caught up in that, I was getting better at it and I was getting different guests. I wasn't just talking to my friends anymore. Like people were like starting to reach out to me a little bit. And I had a little bit more confidence to like reach out to someone like Joe Reinhardt from Hop Along, who at the time were on their rise right there. And I was like super nervous to talk to him because I was just like, well, this is a guy and he's in a band and they're on Saddle Creek Records and this and that. And he just comes over and he's just this dude. Like, and now every time we would see each other, it's like it's just you're friends now. Like,
Yeah.
And he's very tall, so I can always see him coming. And then like through that, I started reaching out to people. Like that's when I reached out to like John Batiste because I was reading The Key. That was kind of how I was it was helping me figure out like, okay, maybe I can talk to this person or maybe I can talk to that person. And then I just reached out to John one day again, thinking like, well, this guy works for XPN. Like he's not going to want to come and talk to me. But then instantly he's like, oh yeah, absolutely. And again, like John and I, like we're sort of professional colleagues in this world as well now, but we're friends. Like, we like to just chat and like talk about how, each other's lives are and, like talk about each other's personal lives with each other and things like that. It's very nice. That's what I love about the music community in Philadelphia is that like the line between, professional networking and just honest to God friendship, a hang, if you will.
Yeah.
It's so thin but not in a weird way. I don't think the ones of us who are good at this like confuse one with the other. We know when it's time. Like I know when it's time for me to be like, okay, I'm the interviewer now and we're going to do this. And I know when it's time to be like, all right, cool. Like when I run into them at shows and stuff like that, everyone's just kind of genuinely glad to see each other.
Yeah. So, you touched on something that I really wanted to ask you about, and that was your production schedule. At any point, did you've made it over 200. What you just last episode was 219, right?
Yeah. The one I just dropped this week is 219. Yeah.
So like, at any point, was there any thought in your mind of stopping? Like, or were you like, once you started, it went?
I think, like I said, at the beginning, I was just kind of had my head down and I was like, just put one out after the other, just put one out after the other and try and make each one you put out be a little better than the last one you did. Learn something. And you have to kind of go back and listen to your own work, which I had a hard time with at first. And now I have no problem with it at all because it's like, well, this is how I get better.
Yeah.
In the same way that like when I was in college and I was, involved in college radio and all that, we would do air checks and we'd have to listen to our own air checks. This is what you sound like on the mic. Essentially get over it. Like get over that you're hearing your voice on the mic and you sound funny. Okay, that's cool. The first few times you're going to feel that. But when I was, and I was taking classes in, production and like like almost like NPR documentary style production and things like that. I was very fortunate enough to have a great mentor, a man named Dan Bergeron, who's also a accomplished regional folk singer as well. He's toured all over. Like he was super helpful in that he gave us the tools. He gave us good, a good bedrock and technique. And then he said, like, go out and make literally whatever you want. He's like, talk to whoever you want. He's like, just use the bedrock of these production techniques. He's like, that's all I want you to do. He's like, I don't care what it's about. He's like, you can talk to your mom. He's like, as long as you use these production techniques that I'm asking you to learn. And that gave me a leg up when it came time to do a podcast, because I didn't have to learn how to structure a show. I didn't have to learn how to talk into a mic. Like, I already knew how to do that. I obviously would get better as time went on, but it wasn't like I was starting from nothing where someone's just like, we want to start a podcast. So I'd be like, how would I do that? I was proficient in Pro Tools. I was proficient in a digital editor. And I knew things like headroom and EQ and compression and things like that. I knew all that stuff just from studying broadcast. So I was able to hit the ground running, maybe like half a step faster than someone who didn't know those things. I'm not saying that those things gave me like tons and tons of, like, oh, I was so far ahead of my peers. I'm like, I was a half step ahead of peers, maybe.
When do you think it clicked? Like, can you pinpoint like an episode or a guest where you got done and you were just like, I'm in the zone and I know exactly what I'm doing?
The joke I often make with people when they finish the interview and like we'll go upstairs and I'm seeing them out there just like, oh, how do you think that went? And I'll be like, I am the last person to ask right now. I have no idea. Like, I need to get a touch of distance from this, and then I got to sit down with the tape. And then when I sit down with the tape, I have a pretty good idea of how it went. And it turns out that it always went fine. Like no matter what I think happened. Sometimes I'll leave interviews thinking like, I don't know if we really got anywhere, obviously, we had a conversation and like, things were talked about and it was pleasant, but I'll walk away from things being like, all right, that might not have been quite as, earth shaking as I would have liked it to be. And then I'll go back and listen to the tape and I'll be like, no, we talked about great stuff. Like, you just have to, when when you finish, you are the least qualified person to consider how it went. I think somewhere in the 30s or 40s of my episodes, I was just starting to interview a lot more people that I didn't know. So obviously you have a different sort of approach to people that you don't know, because they're not my friends. I don't have, that rapport, that history with them. And my production was getting a little tighter. I was starting to like streamline and use some of those older techniques that I learned as an undergrad of, just how to streamline, how to make things better. And of course, I had the benefit of now being almost 20 years ahead in terms of technology, where I had so many more things that I could do that I couldn't do, back when I was younger. I could do it now. And that's when I started to kind of find my stride. I was like, okay, I think I know what this is about. And I started having people play like in the room more at that point, and discovering that was a lot of fun, to just very quickly think, I'm like, well, they're going to come and they're going to talk. And then in about 5 minutes, I need to be able to set them up to play. So it means like, we don't get to have all the bells and whistles and procedures that we would go through if this was a recording studio and we were making a record or cutting a single. Like, it's like 2 mics, put them in the right place, dial a couple of things in on my board real quick, but like real simple, and be like, all right, go. And then the performances you would get out of that, I mean, raw is something to say, but it's immediate. It's an immediate performance. And I would go and tweak a little bit, play volumes a little bit and just like do a little bit of EQ, just very, very light stuff. So I was like, I want this to sound like, to whoever's listening to it, I want it to sound like what it sounded like to me, sitting in this room 8 feet away from, whoever's playing. So from someone like John Fay or something like that, that's what I wanted. I'm like, this isn't perfection. Like, this is an audio tree. This is an NPR. Like, this is me in a base space with two SM57s, just being like, all right, this is what it sounds like.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned when you started talking to people that weren't your friends, because like that's when I finally started to feel like this was something. Like when I started like having to do research, and like that was a big thing, like
Write things down, things like
notes, instead of just like, hey, remember that time when we were playing at the Grape Street pub and this was blah blah blah. Yeah, no, it's been a really interesting path and journey. I got started a long time ago with a bunch of friends. We had like a pop culture podcast, and in like 2011, somewhere around there. And then I walked away, and I was just like, we did that, and it was fun, but whatever. And then the pandemic hit, and everybody was doing live streams and stuff, and I just fell in love with music again. And that's really where all of this came from, because like I had been writing pieces for my website or whatnot, but I had always been trying to find something to do a podcast again with. And this was just, where that came from. Like, how did the pandemic affect you? Because, obviously you couldn't have people come over anymore and stuff like that. So was it a hard pivot, or did it flow okay?
There were moments in the beginning, and I'd say in the first couple of months, where I was considering not necessarily shelving it, but I was like, well, maybe I can just lean more into playlists. Like maybe I can just lean more into that. Because we were all having a hard time with it. Like, I mean, not just from like, the existential fear and dread, but like all of us have been doing things one way and had to do it another way now. And I know this is like the oldest cliche that everyone's been talking about, for this, but there was definitely a couple of moments in there where I thought I might be done. Not because like, just for me being like, I don't know if I have it in me to reinvent the wheel. I was like, I need this show to continue to be what it's about. And it didn't even bother me that we couldn't play out, or that like, sort of the music performing industry ground to a halt, because a lot of my musician friends were way sharper than I was and were able to just hit the ground running and do some live streams, and not just the live streams that we put up with for the first few months. Like these people really figured out how to do this well, to have a good production value, to offer people something other than just like, hey, look at me. And I thought it, and as I thought about it later, now that shows have kicked back in and people are going to shows. And I think we kind of hit something similar where when shows were first coming back in and we could see shows again, even outside or whatever, we kind of didn't care. Like whether it was good or not. Like, we were just like, I'm so happy I'm here. We're so happy to see people to engage in this activity that we engaged in up to this point. And I think that faded too, just in the same way that like our sort of live stream fatigue, in the spring into the early summer of 2020, that faded out. Like, and because we were watching like professionals, like I was watching like Taylor from Dawes at his kitchen table, and that's all fine and good a couple of times, but at some point I was just like, oh, these guys don't know what they're doing either. Like there's a large apparatus around them that makes them present the way that they present. And that's how it works in the professional world. Obviously that's, but I think we saw that a lot more. And I think the same thing when shows came back, I think we were just like, okay, shows. But now I think we're at a point again where we're like, okay, but it has to be good now. Like,
yeah.
This was all fun, but like now it has to be good. And I think a lot of bands have kind of figured out how to make a show as opposed to just showing up and seeing a band play. Like, they're making a thing out of it.
What's really funny is I don't know when you went to your first show post pandemic, but I went to we went to see G Love at the Ardmore Music Hall with Chuck Treese in May. It was their first show, and it was the day that I was like 2 weeks out from my second shot. I was like, it was like a great celebration. But one of the greatest things about that night, besides the fact that someone got kicked out for being drunk, and I was like, oh my God, we're back. But was how weird people got. Like audiences just don't know what to do anymore. It's so great to watch.
I'm trying to think what my first thing. I mean, I went to some outdoor stuff. I mean, talk about a music community that got super creative for a year. Like they were having bands up on the upper like deck of Pharmacy at 18th and Wharton. And so like it was like a Let It Be concert, essentially. Like, the bands were like up on this area and we would just hang out in the street. You could distance as well as you wanted from anyone, wear your mask. Like I'd ride up to it on my bike and just like hang out and watch, bands play, a story up above you. Or think about Sunflower Philly, which came out of nowhere. Like that was Sunflower Philly had always been a thing. That was always a community arts space. In an area, slowly being gentrified over the last few years. But the, Marley from Johnny Brenda's said, well, let's get a couple bands in here and see what happens. And boom, it was probably the most vibrant show scene we had going on sort of the Philadelphia level. And I saw a handful of bands that way. And it was a really great time because you could just be outside in the back, you could have your beer, and then you could just leave.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we got really creative. We got really good at figuring out how to do that. And I mean, and it's not special to us. A lot of people figured out how to do it, but we did it in our way. We did it in our Philly way.
That's 100%. It's amazing. And it's made me love this area, and it's made me love music. I just appreciate it more. Maybe because, for the longest time, I didn't know what live music, I didn't know what would survive. And a lot of places didn't. Sadly, a lot of great places are gone,
Boot and Saddle is gone. And that's that was my spot. That was my favorite spot to see bands in. I used to live 2 blocks around the corner from there.
Oh, really?
I had an apartment at 13th and Dickinson. We were right around the corner. Just because she shows all the time because they ended at 11 and they weren't very loud. Yeah. And those were all limitations of that particular venue, which made it a very desirable venue for me. Also, you could just go and hang out at the bar when your friends were playing. And I didn't even have to go in. If I didn't have time or I didn't want to commit to a whole night, I could just show up before, hang, have a drink, see everyone, and then go home. Which, as you get older, is your favorite part of the night, the part where you go home. I love leaving things early.
Oh, it's the best. I used to be the guy who would be there till last call and want to. Now, exactly. And now I'm out.
Headliner starts. I nod for a couple of songs. I just look and I'm like, it's time to Irish goodbye this one.
No, 100%.
No one knows when you leave. Once the headliner starts, no one knows when you leave.
Yeah. So you just recently in May had your 200th episode. Do you have you accomplished kind of more than you wanted, or are you kind of obviously you're not going to quit? You're going strong, but do you see a next level? What's the next step?
That's an interesting question, and it's something I've definitely thought of, because I was glad to have sort of that ramp up of the 200 because it gave me something to work for, and I got more serious about sort of the publicity aspect of it as well, because I was like, well, you only get one 200, so let's not waste it. And I to be perfectly honest, I had a little bit of that Biden stimulus money kicking around, so I was just like, well, I can, what can I do with this besides buy some shit on Amazon that I don't need. So I engaged a publicist. I worked with Maggie Poulos from Mixtape Media, who I had a relationship with as someone who would, pitch me guests. And it was great to be on that side of it. I'd never really been on that side of it, and it was wonderful. And, got the show written about and talked about in places that hadn't been talked about before, and increased listenership. And that was really great. And then to talk with someone like Helen Light as my 200th episode. I mean, I've been listening to Helen on the radio literally since I set foot in this city for the first time. She's been a presence, not just on just XPN, but a presence as part of Philadelphia music. She was doing what you and I are doing long before you and I were doing it. And she was doing it. She was lucky enough to be able to do it at a big market station like Philadelphia. As people talk about the success of just the Philadelphia music community and sort of how we've risen up over the last decade, WXPN is a huge part of that. Like, and some people love that and some people don't love that. Like, you know, some people think that maybe they're not giving the attention to everything that they can. But I think between XPN and the Key, which I also think needs to be thought of slightly separately from XPN, because John runs it a little differently than a radio station. John's approach is to include as many people as humanly possible, including writing about me, like writing about my shows and my guests, and like bringing me into it as well, which he doesn't have to do. They don't have to do that. Like, they're a radio station. They don't have to have anything to do with me. They don't have to acknowledge that I exist. And the fact that they do is pretty great. I've gotten to do guest spots on that station multiple times. And if you think that's not just the biggest thrill for me, like it is, I love it. Again, being a radio guy, going all the way back to being in college. But the convoluted way of me answering is that, like, what is the next step? I'm not sure, but I've come to these crossroads before, where I think like, well, what's next? And rather than like coming up with a big scheme or coming up with a big thing, I just kind of go back to my mode when I was first starting out, which is just keep putting them out, one after another. Keep talking to people you've never talked to before. Keep delving into parts of the larger music communities that I'm not familiar with. Like, this week's episode is an excellent example of that. Like, Rasan Lucas and Afro Taino. I'm familiar with almost none of the artists that he works with. It's not my world. I'm not familiar with it, but I know Rasan from the community, and that's my in right there, is the person. But I love being able to talk to people like that. And I think I'm just going to keep doing that until something else presents itself. I've toyed with the idea of right before the pandemic, I was starting to think of the idea of like, I should maybe like put on some showcases, like do like some live music things or something like that. And obviously, you know, that had to take a back seat, you know, over the last couple of years. But I'm kicking around with that idea again, like kind of getting back into show promotion a little bit. But again, I want to do it my way. I'm not trying to compete with venues, and I'm not even really trying, if I were to go about doing it, I'm not even really trying to operate like a venue. I'm trying to operate like me, like the way that I would do it.
Yeah.
I'm still not entirely certain what that is, but you know, the wheels are moving, and it's not like I have a lack of amazing people to make involved with it. Like I can jump on Gmail and start sending emails to people, and like would probably have, you know, stuff pretty quickly. So I want to make sure that it's worth everyone's time, you know, and not have it be this, because if you have a half-baked podcast and it's just you as the host, then it's whatever. You're just wasting your own time. Like it's fine. But when you involve other people and you want other people to put their name on it, and you want to put your name on things with other people, then like you gotta make damn sure it's worth everyone's time.
That's I can't disagree more. Like, you know, time is literally the only thing that kept me back from kind of branching out from just interviewing my friends early on, was because I just didn't want to waste anybody's time. And you know, time's super valuable. And no one knows that more than myself, you know, like just like, you know, my time's valuable too, you know, but, and I was always concerned about that. But once I started to understand kind of the process and what I was doing, and once I got more comfortable, then, you know, it was so much easier to not feel like I was wasting someone's time.
Yeah, you want to feel like you have something to offer. And this is something I've said before in press and on the show, is that like when you're in a band, you're always asking for something, because that's, you know, it's always like, you know, come to my show, play my record, put me on the radio, you know, buy my record, you know, blah, 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 blah. And that's fine. Like, that's kind of how it works. I mean, and there's community and there's give and take, you know, and there's, you know, that's how good communities function. But for me, when I started doing the show, I was just so very happy that when I asked someone to be on the show, I had something to offer them. They had something to offer me. There was someone to be on the show, and, you know, they had their own, you know, little group and people who knew what they were. So it was only going to help me, but like I had something for them.
Yeah.
I wasn't just asking them to help me out. And then maybe further down the line, if things work out, maybe I can help you out. It's just like, no, I have an immediate thing for you. I have an immediate outlet for you. And you have a thing that needs an outlet. So, it's nice to have that be. I have a much better relationship, I think, now in the community. And it's like also because I'm older. As a podcaster, as doing what I am right now, than I think I ever did as being in a band. Because when you're in a band, you're so focused on your thing, and you're not really looking at the larger ecosystem around you. Whereas now that I've talked to so many different kinds of people who are all part of it in different ways, I'm so much more aware of not only the larger ecosystem that is, the Philadelphia music community, but how it all fits together. And I don't know if I would have been as cognitive of that if I was, just in a band trying to have shows and make records.
My thanks again to Dan Drago for joining me today on the podcast. For more info on Dan's podcast, visit www.25o'clockpod.com and make sure to subscribe. And be sure to follow him on the socials at 25 O'Clock Pod on Instagram and Twitter, and on Facebook at www.facebook.com/25 O'Clock Podcast. And join us next week for part 2 of our interview where Dan enters, dun dun dun, the Jauntlet. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts from. This podcast, where are you listening to it right now? Where are you listening to it? Wherever that is, subscribe. And if you've been a good human being this year and you want to find yourself on Santa's nice list and earn yourself a super awesome John Scout Merit Badge for Citizenship of the World, you can do so just by rating and reviewing us. Don't forget to visit www.yothat'smyjawn.com and like us on Facebook at facebook.com/yothat'smyjawn for updates and live streams. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter at yothat'smyjawn and search Yo That's My Jawn on YouTube to find the Yo That's My Jawn YouTube channel. And then, while you're there, like and subscribe the heck out of that ish. We want to hear from you. Reach out, and touch some Jawn. That's all we have for you today. Join us Thursday for the Jawn Before Christmas, and then again next Monday for part 2 of my interview with Dan Drago. Blue skies until next time, everybody!
Hey yo, displace the guilt and embrace the pleasure. Your taste in music doesn't have to be measured.
Yo, That's My Jawn is a Lonely Monk production written and produced by yours truly, Nate Runkle. Theme song by Phil Tyler Music featuring Nate 3.0. Special thanks to Fox Run Brands, DX Ferris, Andrew Scott, Natalie Runkle, and the incredibly brilliant and wickedly stunning Katie Daubney. If you or anyone you know has any ideas they would like to share or any guests they would like to hear on the podcast, please feel free to reach out to us at yothat'smyjawn@gmail.com. Or you can leave an audio message for us and possibly hear yourself on a future episode by visiting anchor.fm/ytmj/message. Until next time, be sure to displace the guilt and embrace the pleasure and shout to the world, yo, that's my Jawn.